Good afternoon and welcome to the Takeup. Today we have episode 85, Managing Mass Customization. Hey everybody, how's it going? Happy to see you here. Happy Friday afternoon. This is definitely time for Education Friday and happy to be a part of Education Friday. Everybody had some technical issues earlier, so pardon me while I adjust my camera and get everything set up. But we are connected. We are rolling. StreamYard is up, and hopefully we have enough juice to keep us going for the day. Honestly, there's been some difficulty all through the day, but hopefully everyone will be able to tune in and get something out of what we're doing today. I can definitely see we've had some connection problems, but I will hold in there if you'll hold in there, and hopefully you guys will be excited to get some of this information. I know some of the listeners last week, as I discussed what I was doing with Balloon Fiesta, as you guys have seen before, Balloon Fiesta, big event here that I've handled personalized jackets for many times. I decided to discuss that, and people asked, yeah, how do you handle that informational workflow? How do you handle things coming in, coming out? How do you get things put together so that we end up with less errors, less trouble in our designs and in our overall presentation? And in this case, I thought it was good to just kind of tell the story of the thing, discuss how it got put together, how we did that work, and show you some of the files and such that went into that. So here's hoping that we can get that done today. Like I said, definitely seeing some weirdness on the side of StreamYard. So if you haven't gotten in, hopefully you can catch this on the replay. If I'm having issues with disconnection, stuff like that, let me know. But for that matter, I'm going to go ahead and say hi to some of the folks who are here. Those of you who managed to get in live, we'll see if you guys get something out of it. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have things you want to add to the mix or ask me about workflow and process and embroidery, by all means, even if it's off topic, please go ahead and ask when you want to. But first of all, I'm just going to go ahead and let everybody know I do indeed have a links list up this time around. So this is the links list. Go to linkslist.app/ and here's MX0CMUL. Yes, you probably have to have everything in the order that it is there, but you will find that it is the first comment that is linked at the top of any of these live issues. If you're in here on the replay, you can still check it out. And by the way, please comment if you're on the replay. Happy to have you in no matter when you get to watch. Let's say hi to a couple people who are actually here real quick. First, we have Jeff from Fuller Embroidery Works, Jeff Fuller, and Adam, his son, from bjjhats.com. Ian, happy to see you guys in. I know that you guys are busy working on projects and doing cool stuff. Frank Dunn is in from the UK. So Frank, good evening to you, sir. Happy to have you in. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for always being such an awesome community member. Justin Armenta, digitizer of JA Digitizing and also of the Embroidery Nerd, somebody who I definitely like to work with. Justin, happy to have you in and glad to see you here for Friday. Matthew Enderley of patchphrase.com also saying, howdy there, Eric. I'm doing some much needed maintenance on my machines. You know what? Maintenance is always good. Those things that you prepare for have a tendency to go better, certainly. Let's put it this way. Maybe some people go crazy on maintenance, but I'll say this. A clean machine is a nicely running machine is a machine that stays up, and the machines that have their needles moving up and down regularly are the ones that make money. There's a lot of folks who don't do plenty maintenance on their stuff, and I would recommend everyone look into the maintenance schedule for your machine brand and figure out what is going on with your particular brand of machine. Jenny Preston in also from the UK. Good evening. Looking forward to this. Happy to hear that, Jenny. And I know I had some other commentary from folks. And like I said, I think we're having some connection issues. I can see that I've had comments aren't working on one half of the world here. It looks like I've got some YouTube, some Facebook followers here, but it looks like one of the pages is not active. So if you haven't gotten in, please go over to the YouTube channel and check it out. Search Eric Campbell, ERICH. It'll be easy to find me. And maybe you can get in on YouTube if you're not able to get in on the Facebook page. We've had some issues with the permissions today. So I don't know. We'll have to see what's going on with that. But I know last week, Yosta also said he wanted to hear more about it. So all of you guys who are regulars who want to hear the business stuff, go ahead and tune in. If you're in just for digitizing and art, catch me next week. We'll do something more on that occasion and make it a little bit more in that realm. I know people like to see the creative side of this stuff, but the business side of this stuff is still important. And I think mastering this stuff, mastering the management of information makes a great deal of sense, no matter whether you are a solopreneur or a small shop, third bedroom shop, or you are a massive shop, or if you are growing from one to the other, no matter how it is that you're putting things together, having your information in order makes a great deal of difference as to how easy it is to get your digitizing embroidery done, and how much that you can keep things in line. And frankly, I think it makes you a better shop overall, and it makes you more trustworthy for your clients, because clients are going to come to you and say, hey, I want to do the same thing I did last year. I want to do the same job I've done previously. What was it that I had on the last order? What were these prices? What were these thread colors? What did this look like? Where was it positioned? And if you're the kind of person who manages their information correctly, you look like a superhero when someone asks you these questions, you know them offhand. And that's why I do actually recommend information management systems. Though what I'm going to show you today, in the spirit of showing people stuff that is useful to everyone, as I like to do, I'm going to show you the old school way that I used to handle these massive, multi-decoration orders. I'm talking about, and admittedly, I'm saying massive to a medium-sized shop. So fairly frequently, we'd be dealing with 1,000 jackets. Now, admittedly, a good portion of them, we're not getting excess decoration in that 1,000, but hundreds of individually personalized jackets that had sizing, that had often back logo, left chest logo, and text or name on jackets individually. So I'm going to show you how we did that. And honestly, most of this was handled through printed materials and Excel spreadsheets. So this is in a period of time before everything was being done on the cloud. Now, I certainly moved to doing something very similar via Google Docs. Honestly, via Google Docs, you could do it with Microsoft Office any way that is centralized where you can keep information. But I'm just going to show you a little bit about the process and the flow so you can see what I'm talking about. Because like I said, this is something where rather than try and give you a pitch for the theory, I'm going to just discuss what I actually did in the way of making this work for Balloon Fiesta, being one of the clients that I serviced quite a bit. So we did these sponsor jackets just to tell you the history of the thing. Balloon Fiesta has sponsors and pilots. It costs quite a lot to become a Balloon Fiesta sponsor or pilot. So there were corporate sponsors and these pilots, and part of their sponsorship package was a certain number of these jackets. These were nice jackets. Sometimes Columbia was one of the sponsors. So Columbia was one of the jackets we did before, but you can imagine that we had an outer shell jacket that often had an interior vest, a fleece vest. So it was often a two-part jacket that was made for the kind of extremes of being up in a balloon. It's actually quite cool. And so in the early morning, when you're doing the launch and you're in these balloons, you want to have adequate protection. You want to be nice and warm. Well, these quite expensive jackets were the way to do that. They all had full back decoration. If you didn't see last week where I talked about those decorations, we had full back decoration that was usually done in somewhere else. So often it was hired out. I discussed a particular case in which I had to do low stitch count decoration and do it in-house because of some things falling apart. Like I said, dealing with these errors that can crop up in your embroidery process, in your order process. But in most cases, the backs are already decorated. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at that. Tell you that backs were usually decorated. And what we were doing is dealing with either corporate sponsors or pilots. Corporate sponsors and pilots usually mean that we have either a left chest logo, corporate logo, or we would have corporate text. And then we would often have right chest, individualized names and titles. And especially with the pilots, they were very keen on having pilot jackets. It was definitely a mark of respect to have the pilot name and to be given a pilot sponsor jacket when pilots were flying for sponsors. So invariably, they're highly sought after, highly collectible, important, had to be also maintained. Part of the thing I'm going to talk about today is maintaining the count, because this is the kind of thing that in a lot of shops could walk away. I mean, this is the kind of thing where you have a very valuable garment that is highly collectible and sought after. So this is the kind of thing where counts need to come in correctly. We need to process these things in. And when we process them out, we need to be able to provide accurate counts. And that means tracking things throughout the process. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. But let's go ahead and I'm going to say hi to a couple more people before we get into it. And I'll show you some stuff that's on the links list really quickly to tell you just that I like to give you guys some extra value. So we've got some extra stuff to help you with workflow. Let's say hi to a couple of people real quick first. Brian Bailey, creator of Embroidery, saying happy Takeup Friday. Thank you, Brian. And thank you for the space to do this. I'm in the wonderful Embroidery Studios, which honestly by the green screen behind me, but I am here where we are very near the launch field for Balloon Fiesta. So we actually get to see those balloons go out. Brian's been posting some awesome videos to the Skype for the company. So it's always great to see that stuff, and it's been good to be around. So yeah, definitely Albuquerque scenario going on here. Lyndon saying, hi, everyone. Hi, Lyndon. Happy to have you in. Mike can't stay long. We're definitely going to replay. Yeah, Mike, I think this is up your alley, my friend. But I think you're probably already doing a lot of these organizational things because you're running enough heads that you need to, especially if you start running multiple heads, you start running a lot of production. Being organized in one fashion or another, whether it's paper goods, whether it's Excel spreadsheets, no matter how you do it is critical. John says, better late than never. Thanks for sharing on YouTube. Yep, we have it on YouTube every week. So if you guys want to catch it on YouTube instead, or let's say you can only listen while you're in the back of the shop, you want to throw it on your phone, and it's easier to do that than Facebook, especially if you're somebody who's got YouTube Premium. Those of you who have premium subscriptions to YouTube, you can turn off your screen and have it playing with the just audio. Feel free to get that on the YouTube feed. I'm happy to have you there too, even if you can't chime into the comments. Sandy also said, good afternoon. So Sandy, happy to have you in as well. But let's get into it, right? So a couple things I want to go over. Like I said, I do want to show you the one quick look at the links list. I think that it's worthwhile just to let you know what's on there. So if you check out what's the stuff that's on the links list today, what you're going to see are a few different articles. I've got one about preventing mistakes in your embroidery shop, and this one actually really goes over the approval process. And I will jump into that a little bit as we're going on today, where we discuss kind of the staged approval process that I like to do, because I really do think that going through a proper approval process in one faction or another, no matter how you're handling it, doing a staged approval process is the best way you can handle it, especially when you're doing any sort of work that requires you to change base art before you digitize. Then there really needs to be multiple stages of approval. It's not something that everybody loves because it means there's signing off and there's paperwork to do. However, approvals are how we don't have spoilage. That's really what it is. The better we do at the approval process, the better that we do at the also at the information delivery, the information workflow process within our own shops, even within department to department, if it's only us doing the work, the better we do at closing out each step of that approval process, each step of the informational flow, the better we do it not spoiling. So this particular article has some good stuff there and actually connects to a larger article to discuss that stuff. Certainly, I'm showing you some processing software that we would use. So we're doing some work software, some informational software to handle your workflow. However, this can be done, as I said, cloud only. This can be done local on Excel spreadsheets, whatever makes it easy to work for you. And especially if you're a single person, then you've got a centralized system just by having something saved that you can look at. I still recommend using cloud-based worksheets for a lot of folks, or at least backing up to something cloud-based so that you can get them from anywhere. Like I said, makes you a superhero if you can pick up your phone and tell people exactly what they had in their previous orders. However, that's on there about the approval process. One of the other pieces is actually from, it's from this particular issue of Images Magazine. So this month I came out with a piece about color management for machine embroidery. As you can see here, you've got these lovely patches provided by Marilee from Embrilliance, but you can see how color differs greatly in context. The reason why this is interesting for this particular case is I also talk about how we get approvals and how we send things off to get color approvals, something that's also in that approval process piece. So if you want to talk a little bit about color, especially if you want to know more about how color functions and what I think about color approvals, and especially why I think that you need to be very clear with people and establish some kind of guidelines for color. Embroidery color is always difficult. Digital previews, no matter how good they are not 100% like thread in person. So check that out. And that's also there from Images Magazine. A couple other links that are on there. Because of last week, I talked about the awards that I won for the particular piece for International Balloon Fiesta. Somebody asked me if I had that issue. I do actually have a PDF link from the Stitches back catalog about that. So I threw that up there if you want to see the awards there. There's a couple of awards that I won that year during the Golden Needle. There was that one, and then one for Dragonfly Goddess, which is a multimedia piece that we did. So there's a couple things there. If you just want to see some of those old school awards from Stitches Magazine, I thought I would throw those in there for fun. And also we have another one from Graphics Pro. So Graphics Pro Magazine, which I am sometimes in. And it's kind of an overall print and wrap and embroidery magazine. In this particular one, it's just a few tips for maintaining informational workflow and some stuff that I'm going to talk about today. But if you have extra time, you want to read some stuff, or if you like reading more than listening, or just need something to reinforce what we talked about today, check out the links list and you'll be able to get something there. All right. With that, folks, I think we'll go ahead and get on into it. and talk about managing multiple customizations and orders. Like I said, I'm called this one managing mass customizations. In this case, what I'm talking about is dealing with an order that is large, that has multiple customizations. It's not just bringing in a bunch of garments, they're all getting a logo and the logo is going in one location. It's about dealing with a complicated order in which multiple personalizations occur and you have to get these things done. Or like the orders that I'm talking about for Balloon Fiesta, they were collective orders that were actually being handled by a middleman, handled by the people at Balloon Fiesta, but were then being sent out to multiple individual sponsors. So we actually were dealing with multiple people through someone who was helping with the process in the middle. And frankly, one of the reasons why I think those jobs stayed with us, even when other work that was being done for the Fiesta ended up with other shops at certain points of the kind of history of our time with it, was because the organizational part of it that we did really took pressure off people. And if this tells you anything about adding value, if you guys have seen any of my videos or seen any of my articles about adding value or the things that add value to your embroidery process that aren't embroidery, a huge one is making orders easier, making deliveries easier, helping someone with organization. Because whether you're dealing with a team sport or you're dealing with business to business stuff like this, where there's multiple customizations, your ability to keep this stuff straight and to help it be deliverable and easy for them to handle is absolutely part of what makes the package of what you do worthwhile. So in this case, we're going to talk about this managing multiple customizations. And one of the things I'm going to show you straight away is intake, right? What we're talking about is informational workflow. And when I say informational workflow, the reason I kind of call it this and make it a buzzword is because too often when we talk about workflow, people are talking about just the process of getting actual decoration done. But informational workflow, as I define it, is the chain of information from the first contact with people out through when you're delivering not only garments to people, you're delivering not only garments to your customer, you're delivering the information they need to take that and either parse it out, send it out, or to look at that information to make sure that everything is square with their numbers, their tallies. So informational workflow is that. It's the information in, it's the information out, but it's also the way we handle each stage of information to make sure that everyone in the process gets what they need. So that's informational workflow. But the thing that I'm going to say is no matter which way we're talking about informational workflow, whether it is this multi-decoration order, whether it is a normal order, the first thing we always have to do is master the intake of information. We have to master the intake. When we're dealing with individual customers, this certainly means we're talking about the interview process. It's why I often advocate for forms, sometimes even paper forms, even though we're working in a very digital fashion, or working with forms that have very specific form fields that we need in order to make something happen when we're having customers work with us. It's not that we want to make people fill out horrible forms just to get into the quote process, but for ourselves, when we're doing intake information, there's certain things we absolutely need to know, and there's things we need to be able to pass on. So the first thing we need to remember, no matter how we handle this, is that we have to master the intake of information, and we have to be very careful, precise, and complete. So if there's anything to take away from this, is that it's like anything else, garbage in, garbage out. If we get poor information, if we get incomplete information, if we don't track things down at the very beginning of the process, we're not going to be able to get anything right from then on. Everything has to be right on the intake for anything to happen correctly on the outside of this thing. Or at the very least, if we don't do the intake right, the likelihood that we're all going to be in agreement, ourselves, the customer, maybe the customer's end user, if we're passing these things on like we do with this multi-decoration order, if we don't do the intake properly, the numbers never line up on the other end. And if there's something that I've seen go wrong over and over and over again in every embroidery shop and every embroidery process, this is it. You absolutely must be sure of intake. And this is not just information. Certainly, I'm going to talk more about information. This includes garments. Check in. Even with customer supplied garments, even when someone says they are counted in, even if they are swearing up and down that things are done, the day that garments touch your shop, the day that they are on the table in your shop, the day that the box hits your dock, I would expect, unless there is a very good reason, that you should count in any garment you get, whether this is from a supplier or definitely if it's coming from customer supplied garment stock. Count everything in, and I don't mean by bundles, count it all in. Verify the number with the person who brings it to you. And I'll tell you the truth, when we're dealing with extremely expensive garments or garments that are mission critical, event garments like we did with Balloon Fiesta, this meant quite literally asking people to hang around and make sure that they got the counts correct, or to be present for the counts if it's something that is, like I said, a collectible, something that's incredibly valuable per piece. We often asked for people to witness the count. Now, I'm not saying you're going to do that for everything. What I am saying is I sincerely think that you should be counting in and writing down your garment counts and making sure that that jives with what the person who brought you the garments expects. Certainly, you then have to take possession of them. After this, then it is in your hands to make sure every garment you count in is the garment that they get back. However, especially when we're dealing with multi-decoration, like I said before, we're talking about garments wherein I'm going to have to match a sized garment to a name and a logo as well. We're going to have those things match a size and get back to an individual sponsor out of a group. So they're going to have to be packaged separately as well. When I have to do that, that means I absolutely have to know, do I actually have the garments that I need for the size for the person that they need to be for? Do I have the things that are specified before I get into the decoration process? So intake is incredibly important. This also means setting very clear boundaries with the people you're working with. As in, if I don't have the initial logo information or the initial logo art from you, your date continues to move further back. And this includes establishing some boundaries about cutoff dates. I actually discussed this morning with the half with Aaron Montgomery. We were sitting talking about this particular topic to some degree. We're talking about customer expectations. And one of the viewers said, hey, I just did a name for something in Balloon Fiesta. And I laughed because I said, if you did a name instead of the people who are doing the rest of the garments, it probably means either they didn't plan for it or pay for it with the sponsorship, or they missed a cutoff date, because that's one of the other things. When you're dealing with an event like this, you have to establish and the lead end what the last day is that you could reasonably take garments and get logos on them and get names on them, especially when we take into account that all names, all logos must be approved by somebody who has final decision-making capability. That's just how it is. This is the way that you make sure you don't have spoilage. This is the way we don't ruin incredibly expensive garments. We get things approved and we master the intake of information. And what I'm going to do is actually show you some, like I said, these are not going to be the most mind-blowing things you've ever seen in your life. I'm showing you Excel spreadsheets. However, I still want to show you some of the things that I did. And I'll actually show you a couple different versions of what we did, because I've got years and years of these things. And this is all previous to using full-on production management software. With full production management software, a lot of this is taken care of by the fact that all the form fields are there, things are filled out, it tracks progress, and your departments all have the ability to say yes or no, certain things are done, art is approved, art is not approved, stitch out's approved, stitch out's not approved. Design has, everything is out to production. Production's been done. Packaging's been done, what have you. We can track it that way. But in this case, this was my intake set. And so for intake, this is something I'm going to show you. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this. There's some names and stuff on here, but these are names that are on people's public jackets. So I don't think it's going to cause any problems. And this was many, many years ago. However, what you're going to see is in the particular logo, I'll go ahead and pull the banner down so you can kind of just see it. This was actually color coded. The reason why we have most of the colors are correct on these things, or are all yellow, is because they've actually, yellow was the color for everything being complete and put into the system at this point. And what you're going to see is we have the name of the particular art or logo that's being done. And then we have some other things that are interesting specifically to us. You have to establish a method that makes sense to what you're doing. Now, for us, we had a pricing schedule that included whether or not you had a logo was a flat rate. We had flat rates for the number of lines of text on the left chest as well. And we had rates that included logo plus lines of text. So in this case, what you're seeing here is on the left-hand side, it tells you the name of whatever the particular logo or the particular client was. On this, we have the size counts. And after the size counts in this particular piece, we have our totals. And then we have rows. The column that says rows, that says either it's a logo or it has how many rows of text, because we had a base text that we're using for all of these. In this case, you can see the Marriott Pyramid here had a logo. And then what do we have here? We have DP sent approval, tape to embroidery. And by the way, yes, I know tapes. That was a name that stuck with this particular shop for quite a long time. They used the name tapes. It was the common parlance for embroidery files because the shop had been around for some time. Did we actually send tapes or anything? No. but that was the common way that we talked about it. So we have to make sure it makes sense to the people in the back. That's what we did. So tape to embroidery, and then digitize said, in this particular year, was this file digitized new? And that helped me when I went back to check over this and present the final bills for digitizing, since we had fees that were related to digitizing that we used a flat rate to achieve in this particular instance with this customer. So what you can see here is in each piece, we have these are just logos. They don't have individual names. And in this case, in this particular set, what we did was separate individual name plus logo combinations into their own line. That wasn't always the way it was done, but it worked for this particular subset, and it worked for this year as far as how many personalizations we had done. But in that case, what we did then is use that to separate out individual sizing. And then this was separated out by logo. And you can see that this particular company had all of these individual people who had names. And you can see that we had logo plus names, or we had 2 lines of text. And the same kind of thing went on for each particular set or group that was here. So as we can see, we have all of these individual pieces, whether or not they have a logo, and are they delivered. And you can actually see throughout here, why are these all color coded and correct? Well, on each of these, digital previews were sent. Approval was gotten back from the people who had the final say on it. And when approval was actually officially had in hand, the tape, the embroidered file, was sent to the embroidery department with all of the information that goes with it. And this was done for every single entry. And this particular piece is only one sheet of many that were done. And then we also had, that was number 2. Here was the number 1 sheet. And this was actually, this particular one was separated onto another sheet. You can just see what the original thing came out with. And then we had some unembroidered pieces that were done for people. And we still had the sponsors listed, because even if they were unembroidered, these particular pieces would then be packaged individually for the people who were not going to have them embroidered. And so it helped to have that master sheet, but this was the sheet for the embroidery in that piece. And I'll also tell you that this was constantly changing. This is actually a version, because I know from some of the logo sheets that later on, Snyder's of Hanover was one of the ones that ended up, Residence Inn, one of the ones that ended up having a logo down the road. So the truth of the matter is these things change over time. It's not set in stone, but you record everything. So what are we looking for here? It's not that we're looking for everything to be perfect from the get-go. What we're looking for is recording everything in a way that is, and this is the big deal, central and accessible. There has to be one master source for the information that everybody can go to when they need it. So it has to be centrally located. We can't have 18 little areas where it lives. So if you are doing this on some sort of local file, it has to be with someone who is the master of the information. I was that person. In this particular organization, I was that person. However, this can also be handled if you have people who are trusted to work on that file or to work in that informational management system. Like I said, these days, I would highly recommend anyone with any decently sized shop to use production management software of some kind that is made for this. But if you're not going to do that, or if you don't have that kind of business yet or that kind of money, hey, make a spreadsheet that has the columns that you need, it has the information that you need, and make sure that it is central and accessible. The great thing these days is we can throw this in something like Google Drive or OneDrive and have not only a spreadsheet that's central, but have all of our assets. And I mean by that, the art assets, the approval sheets, all of the rest of that in one central located area that's accessible to everyone, so that when we need to show approvals or anything like that, that's what gets done. So what we need to remember is what? We're mastering the intake of information and the intake of goods. When things arrive, we're counting them out. We're writing down the count. And we're verifying it. And we're saying, has this been accepted? And in this case, I showed you the art sheet that was put in place to make sure that all the digitizing and the personalizing, the names and the designs got done and sent to the embroidery department. In this case, we intake that information and we manage it at every step. We record everything in a place, in a way that is central. Everyone can get to it. It's accessible. Everyone has a way to get to it. You have a way to get to it wherever you need it. And that it is clear. We have to make sure it is organized. We have to make sure that we're maintaining informational workflow. And this is workflow, not work stop. It has to continue flowing downhill. Every person at every stage should be making sure that they're creating kind of a product of the information they need. And also, hey, information and assets and actual garments that go to the next stage. We have everything coming in and being checked in. Now it's there waiting for production. We're going to queue that up. and we're going to make sure we add the information that we need to it to make sure everyone has what they need, right? But let's talk a little bit about the approval process as we get through that. I think that it's really critical to deal with the approval process. Certainly, like I said before, it's why I've written several articles about it. What I usually recommend for approval are these stages, which is pretty much the same stage we would do for any sort of approval process. Number one, and I'll go ahead and make this bigger so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Pre-digitizing art approval. If we are making art or changing art, then we have to do an approval of the art itself. So if something about the art has to be changed, has to be altered, or we're not entirely sure of the art before we digitize it, then we want to send that art off, that change to the text off, that added name off, and make sure someone will check it out. In the case of art that we already have approval on, that we know the art is good, we're being provided art from a sponsor and they have everything they need, then we don't have to mess with the pre-digitizing art approval. Pre-digitizing art approvals are only for us making alterations to the art, or in any case when we don't know how the digitizing is going to be done. So we send that off ahead of time. Then we would have the digital preview of the digitized file. So digital preview gets sent out, and this is for gross errors. When you have gross errors, something like a misspelling, like a misplaced color, like a wide, maybe a very vast change in size that people weren't expecting. These kind of gross errors are picked up by digital previews, making sure that we have things aligned correctly, misspellings, that kind of stuff. And by the way, I know that my title card has a misspelling in it. I realize that I did it, and I will be fixing it on the final thumbnail. But yeah, hey, I didn't have an approval process. It was just me working on something and working on it later at night than I should. However, that's what digital approval is for. It's for gross errors. This is where we see problems like if I had sent off one of the logos, and I'll actually pull this up. I have a sheet of logos, and this is a logo I've shown you guys before. It's actually from Ahern Rentals, which was one of our sponsors that we worked with several times. But this is the kind of sheet you would often see. You'd see something like this, where you would send off a mass sheet for a particular sub sheet of that big list, where I would say, all right, we're going to send this off to everyone and make sure that we have, a gross approval here. This is all these different logos. I just want to make sure these are all to scale. Are the colors in the right place? Are the spellings in the right place? And is this the correct file? I know either I had a DST on file or I had a digitized piece on file, or in the case that we had people who had their own assets who would send in their own digitized files, it was acceptable, though I didn't love it. In this particular case, with this many corporate sponsors, some of them did indeed have their own embroidery files and didn't have me do that work. When they sent that in, I wanted to make sure they saw that I had that and that the rough areas of where the colors were at least properly represented. And these would go out as a big PDF. And this was handled, like I said, this is the middleman problem. We would have this handled by our middleman who is going to deal with the sponsors and say, is this the correct logo? Is this what you intend to be on there? They're still going to get a final approval after this. However, in this case, what we want to make sure is just the gross approval. Is this correct? Do you expect these colors? And frankly, this one doesn't show it, but these were also always placed on the actual color of the jacket. The approvals were done on the color of the jacket. They were sent digital previews with the jacket color behind them as a mock-up to say, these are the general colors. If you are, let's say, Krispy Kreme donuts, this is going on a red garment. Are you happy with the green and the red together? Or let's say we are 770 KOB here. If I have to make a change to your colors because your standard colors are red, but we have a red jacket this year, I'm going to send this in white and black. Is this an acceptable way to use your colors? Or do you have something else you want to have done? Gross errors. Or let's say something that I might have worked on myself, like this University of Phoenix logo with New Mexico campus. If for some reason I misspelled campus, I misspelled New Mexico, something that really didn't happen to me very often, it's to say, is it spelled correctly? Are you happy with it? Is this what you want? Is this the proper logo? Or people where we had multiple sets of logos, like the people here at Pepsi or Gardenia's, if we had a ton of logos for these particular people, if we had 3 or 4 or 5 versions of the logo, is this the version you actually intend? You told us it was. Is it actually the correct one? And is this what you want? And also in the case of adding things like text, as you see here under the Beamster cheese logo, they have their real logo, but they also added Betty Bovine underneath that as part of that tagline. That is an added piece of text that has to be approved. So no matter what it is, you have to have it approved. It's something that needs to happen. The digital preview is that gross approval chance. It's what gives you a chance to make sure that stuff goes right. So that's the first part of it. We do our digital previews. Any gross errors are checked over. And that's what I was talking about when I showed you the earlier list that we have here. when we have that sent off, digital preview is sent off. Now I know when I don't have my approvals in, if I just see that this Y is here and the approval is done, I can say, all right, that digital preview is off, but I can tell I don't have anything in the approval process yet. That means I haven't received the email or the call that says this was approved yet, so I can't send it off. Then if I have gotten an approval, but I haven't managed to send all of the information, in this case, we called it tape to embroidery. Yes, I know everybody make fun of me about paper tapes because like I said, I've never touched one for embroidery, but yeah, that was the name a lot of people called them. If I hadn't sent that back and I can see that that's not here, I know that the next thing I need to do if I have an approval, but I haven't sent the tape, is to prepare that production packet. That's something else I'm going to talk about in a moment. But yeah, that's how we handle it. We're sending our digital previews off. We're making sure that people understand what things are going to be, the gross area where it's going. In the case of these sponsor jackets, everyone was told ahead of time as part of their ordering process with Balloon Fiesta where the logos were going to go, unless there was some sort of problem with that. So they already knew the locations. They already knew the rough sizes, though I would communicate the size to them in a final production sheet. And they knew essentially what was going on as far as colors. However, I was frequently called upon to make color decisions to make sure that they understood what was going on there. And I had to make sure at the very least to say, all right, these are the colors we're going to use. Is this okay? Do you want to approve them yourselves, or do you want to trust me, or do you want me to do a Pantone match and go with what I have? I'll be honest with you, most of the sponsors trusted my judgment on this. Some of them had thread choices already. And if they were one of our customers, I was often able to take thread colors directly from the logos that we had for their other work. And that was one of the other reasons we were valuable, is that we often had logos already digitized for local companies. So when they became sponsors, they wouldn't have to pay an additional digitizing fee to have things done if we had the logo on file. So it's another thing that provides value to people. Final previews, often sampling and stitch out. If you have a customer who is absolutely requiring a sample or wants to see something in the thread, whether that's for color or quality representations, then almost the only chance we have is to have someone come in physically and look at a stitch out, or to send something out to them. In the case of this particular order, these are not the kind of orders where that's going to get done. And frankly, we would recommend to most of them that we didn't do this kind of work. Did we still stitch everything out? Absolutely. Most people were content with a photographic representation of it so they could see quality. We all know that doesn't handle color perfectly. Most of the time when we're dealing with corporate entities like this, they know their colors, they have color matches, they have Pantone colors, especially as you saw some of the brands that I showed you there were larger national brands. These folks have colors. Krispy Kreme has colors. Pepsi has colors. Beamster has colors. Snyder's, they all have Pantone colors that I can match to my best equivalency. And quite a few of them, especially when they're dealing with sponsorship pieces like this, the expectation was that we were going to match the Pantone as closely as possible, and that most of the time that was good. That was not a problem. And I'll be honest with you, lots of these companies, including things like Folgers and even Tequila Rose, Airgas, these companies were usually willing to go with a kind of blessed color that we would select for the year that was done for all of the text drops. So all of the ones that were just text, and we had quite a few of them that were just lines of text and didn't have logos, that was all done in one thread color that was selected for the year as part of the theme. That thread color was often used for single color logos, and most of the people were fine with that being a representation of what Balloon Fiesta had to do. Admittedly, once in a while, we had people who weren't into that. When they weren't into that, they would specify their colors and we would handle them as specified. But even with some of the bigger brands, you'd be surprised. Some of the bigger brands that are here, I digitized because they didn't have their own files on hand. So even though you have these really large brands, you'd be surprised that big brands, big corporate brands or products, they didn't have access to their own digitized files. And usually, as part of the package, we're happy just to pay to have us handle all that. Yeah, digital preview was first. Most of the time, they weren't seeing it in the thread. We had some clients who did. I will also say that sponsorship was something where you didn't see a ton of new people every year handling it. Most of the time, you could count throughout this list, a lot of the people. Why do we not see many things that are saying digitized on this right-hand column? That's because almost all these people, even those ones who had logos, were multi-year sponsors. And once the digitizing was done, we were just going to be able to continue on with the information from their first logo over and over, unless we had something like a color problem where we were going to have a conflict. Unless we had that color conflict, once again, because we were the people who did what? Informational management. We had our information in hand. We had our thread colors recorded. We knew what file we were supposed to be using. Year after year, we could continue to deliver the same quality and the file that was expected. It's setting expectations and then following through your workflow and keeping track of your information that makes this stuff possible. And I'll actually show you another earlier version of one of these sheets, and you can actually see where it's an in-process sheet. And in this case, these ones are just prepared and in production. This was previous to having all the intake on, and it's one that I learned from, where I needed to have the rest of it to make sure that the art part of the process was being handled on its own. But as you can see, we have things like color coding. So one of the other things you can do with this in this in-process piece is say, all right, I have colors that are coded for when something is correct. When these are highlighted in yellow, I've got this settled out and I know what I'm doing with it. When these are highlighted in orange, well, these things are being sent off to someone else, or they've been picked up because they have a decorator who they're going to have handle their particular logo. Especially some people, they had their own decorators. And we were willing, as long as this was okay and accounted for, to have them pick things up from us. They would take them for the final decoration of their logo to their own decorator. And that was something that was acceptable. And frankly, when we were getting close to those cutoff dates, sometimes that was the only way things could work. We had people who wouldn't order logos until the last minute. We would have a full complement of work that had to be done for the event. In that case, we were fully willing to allow them to take their own garments, pick them up, sign for them, and take them to their own decorator so that they could have them done. Or if somebody really didn't want to pay for a new file and their decorator wouldn't release the file, not something I'm very fond of as a practice, but some people do it. If they wouldn't release the file, then we would let them take those to their other decorators. And you can see that some of these things highlighted just shows you, yes, we've checked them off. We know what we're doing with these. This has been handled as far as this, but we did the prepared and process and production. And I'll be honest, this wasn't as effective as the later process that we got into. And none of this was as effective as having a full management suite. But in the same case, like I said, the thing to realize is, when we're going through this approval process, and I've said previously, I'll go ahead and run you through it. It is pre-digitizing art approval if you have to make a change to the art, digital previews to show the gross errors, or at least to reveal gross errors and just show people a concept of what the embroidery is going to look like. As we can see, we're kind of having camelback on this thing where it's lumpy and bumpy because we know that pull and push compensation is going to come into this. So it can't be a perfect one-to-one representation of the embroidery, but it at least gives them a chance for those gross errors. And then we have either photographs or the real thing in person for people who really need to match colors by eye, who want to see things in a thread to justify them. And that was what we did even with the multi-decoration. And like I said, the thing really is this is the key right here, maintaining the habit. We have to make sure that every piece of this stage is followed. When you establish a process, when you have one of these sheets, when you have something that you know you need, part of the real problem for anybody is just maintaining the habit. Once we intake the stuff, we check them in. We never let a box go to production until it's been checked in and verified. When someone sends us art, we make sure we write down that the art is sent. We make sure we verify that it's the correct art before we digitize. And once we've digitized, we don't send it back to production until we have an approval. Each one of these steps is critical to getting things done correctly. And honestly, there's a little bit more to that. One of the things I talked about earlier was assuming that you are producing a product for the next person down the road. We talked about this, how each division, we have to produce a product of information and materials that we deliver to the next step. If you're somebody like you or me, you're in digitizing, well, I'm going to have to produce a product, and that product is all of the information that is required for the embroidery people, the production people, to take that design, thread the machine up correctly, know where it goes on the garment, know what they have to do with it, and in this case, know which sizes are going to get the particular logo and the particular name. And one of the ways I did that was that every individual sponsor in one of those chains got their own sponsor sheet. And I'll actually show you an example of a simple one of these rather than showing you a really complicated one. I'll show you a very simple version of this because it's something that's easy to tell. Wells Fargo is a fairly consistent sponsor and people who are flying quite frequently. And as you can see in this particular year, they were, for number one, here's the first thing I'm going to tell you. We had that master sheet. Well, this sponsor sheet tells you lines 15 through 20 were the Wells Fargo order, and we know that they are getting this logo. They're getting the Wells Fargo square logo. We have it in color. And yes, you can do this in Excel. Yes, you can do this in Google. You can paste an image into a cell so that even if you're producing a spreadsheet like this, you can produce it with an attached preview. Is this the final preview we're using for justification of the design? No, we're still going to give them that sheet. And I'll talk about that in a second. But we now have a sheet that says this particular logo that looks like this. It is roughly in these colors. Yes, I don't have color threads listed on this, but that's part of the rest of the packet. This still does help. Here is a visual check to say this particular logo is going on these lines, these line items. So lines 15 through 20 from our master sheet, which was named AIBF, sponsor sheet 1. So it refers back to the original master sheet. We know exactly where it comes from. We know what needs to get checked off later. We know what we're looking to match against if anything is incorrect. We have a trail. We have breadcrumbs. If you're using a production system, you don't have to have all this stuff. It's going to be handled by the system. If you're doing it on paper, you're doing it in Excel, you're going to have to handle this yourself. And part of the good thing you can do is establish these breadcrumbs for yourself. Always leave references. Like I said this, I'll say it this way. Be the friend of future you. Set future you up for success. When you have a problem, you'll be able to look back and find out where that problem came from if you leave breadcrumbs like this. So we've identified the sheet where he's like, all right, it's come from a sponsor sheet. It is on lines 15 through 20, and I've got these here, and these were all set up for different orders from divisions of Wells Fargo. The embroidery is the Wells Fargo logo. We have an image. We know what it's supposed to look like and roughly what colors it is. And in this case, we also have the background color of the garment. So let's say we have multiple garments that are being done, or multiple divisions of garments that are slightly different or have different colorways. We can tell exactly what we're looking at sight. We print this off, and yes, that means printing off a color sheet for each individual sponsor. It's a very small price to pay to have this literally go with the physical garments back. Now, do I like using digital assets? Absolutely. And in this day and age where we can scan things, we can have a barcode on a box and we can handle it digitally, and that every station may have a screen next to it, or we can use our mobile devices to access information, you might not need to do this. If you're doing it the old-fashioned way, if you're doing it the way we were at the time, this is what was going on. Every set of garments, every box of garments that was being done. Number one, the boxes or the set of garments was being divided for a sponsor sheet. This particular set of lines 15 through 20 was going to be repackaged out of the mass. We were going to pull the order out of the mass accepted amount that was coming out. We're not having an operator go up to the boxes and pull an individual order themselves. We're going to prepare for our operator a box that is this particular sheet that only has the garments that are supposed to go with this logo in said box. This sheet is going on top of the box. It is sufficient for them to know at sight what it's supposed to be, so we just don't have immediate errors with the wrong logo on the wrong garments. And as you can see, we have counts for size with totals. And we have a place on this that is left empty for finished counts so that the operator, upon finishing their work, will be able to hand this off. They can write down their finished counts. And later versions of this actually had a finished count for the people who were doing trimming and packaging. So it's something where we can have two sets of counts, operators counting them onto the machine, of course, and then they are finished counting back off. So generally, they're making sure everything is there. They're counting them in, they're counting them out. So they're in the box, they're all set up. They should be good for the operator to go. Operator runs them, and they count them out with the finishing department on the way out. So this is put on with every garment, right? And like I said, we still have color sheets. So you're still going to have color sheets of some kind. In this case, this is one that I printed off from Embroidery. It has a centering mark. It is ready for use for an actual template if we have to use it for positioning. But then we just have the color breakout list that's here. Something of this set, whatever software you have will put out some sort of color break sheet. This was definitely going to go with that garment. So we're going to have the garments will have this with it. They will have the color sheet with it. And back in the days of SneakerNet, and by SneakerNet, I mean transferring files by walking them back and forth on media, whether that was disk-based or USB, we literally used to separate these out where the file would be brought along with the sheets and added to that specific box. So files are going to be loaded and ready in that specific set of garments. And as we brought these boxes up, we would put them in staging rows behind the machines that were supposed to use them. So what we're trying to do is this. By the time this thing is in production, by the time a production person has to touch these things, there's no guesswork as to what's going where. Everyone knows exactly what's going on what. In the case of name sheets where we had multiple names, that sheet would be amended by having individual rows with the name listed and which size it was. So the same sort of sheet was going to be used, excepting that each individual name was on a list and it in that grid had the size garment that was going to that name, so that we knew logo went on the one chest size. The good thing is we don't have to do much with positioning, because in this particular case, we're dealing with garments that are all the same. The logos all go in roughly the same place, despite the fact that the logos are different. So we don't have to worry about that. If it's a logo, we know where it goes because they all go in the same position. If it's a name, we know where it goes. They all go in the same position. However, we know that we have this logo, which is pictured here. We have it on the pictured on the sheet. We know how many total garments we have. We know what sizes we should have. And if we have names, we know individually what those names should be as well. And honestly, the same process of approvals happened with text also. That's the other thing, is the text would come in, and certainly text would come in as whatever format they did. Generally, we would actually ask the people on the other end to keep their own spreadsheet. We would say, all right, send us over a spreadsheet that has the names on it. We want you to verify that with the customer, since you're acting as the middleman. Make sure that you're getting that stuff done. And in this case, something may look like this that we would then send back. Did I do approvals on names or text? Absolutely. The same sort of thing would happen. This would get sent back out. It would be sent to the pool of sponsors, and the pool of sponsors would say, yes, that is spelled correctly, and yes, we are okay with this text and colorway. In this case, these were just normal clients who would come in and decide not to use logos. Plenty enough of these folks would not. The cool thing was, and I'm going to go ahead and give you kind of a tip on sales and on upselling. With any of the people who would come in, let's say we have Allstate Insurance, and if I had an Allstate Insurance logo, I would frequently send this, but I would also send a digital preview of the Allstate Insurance logo that I had on file and say, if you would like, the additional charge for logo is this. Here is a logo we have on file that you can use without digitizing fees. And frankly, that I cannot tell you how many times that resulted in someone scaling up to buying a logo. Because they didn't know who they were working with. They had a middleman on hand for this. They didn't know which shop was getting the eventual order necessarily. And if they did, they didn't know if we had the logo on hand. And frequently, I would have logos they weren't aware of. Especially when you're talking about things that are franchised like insurance. You may have had one insurance provider come in and have you digitize a logo, and you now have that on file. And it's something that's universal for the entire company. So in this case, yeah, insurance logo, something like that, it's often that I would go ahead and send those back. But no matter what, whether it was a name set like this, whether it was titles, and this one is actually, these are corporate names. These are not the individual names. I also don't love showing everybody a bunch of individual names from people. But when we're dealing with people's names, the same sort of thing would occur. Approval process still happens. The intake happens with the names. I take a look at those, make sure everything is in order. And I'm going to send out a sheet of names like this for that, for the multiple decoration setup, where people can say, yes, this name is spelled correctly. Yes, we are happy to be on this list, and we are happy with the colorway that you have selected. So approval still happens with text. Approval still happens no matter what. That step is important, like I said, especially when we're dealing with critical event-based, time-sensitive stuff on expensive garments that can't be replaced, that have an existing decoration, especially because, remember, even if I can buy this Columbia jacket, these things were mostly having their backs embroidered somewhere else. So the full back embroidery was usually done somewhere else unless we did special events. Many of the special events, like the gas balloon races or some of the higher end packages that might have some other sponsorship gimmies, some other jackets or something included, I would often do that stuff locally, and we would do the decoration locally as well. But even if I did digitizing on it, a lot of these pieces were done somewhere else overseas or at the in the production stage when we ordered those garments. So that's something you couldn't really redo easily. Getting extra stock was not something that could happen, especially as you get closer and closer to the event. So that's just one of those things you have to think about. You have to be careful about your intake, but you definitely have to be careful about your approval process, because it makes a world of difference to whether or not you get things done correctly. And like I said previously, you want to make sure that you can produce that package of everything that you need. And it's something that I actually cover in the article, the little tip article about maintaining informational workflow. One of the biggest tips I can give you is that each department and worker should have access to everything they need, and that each job, has these, not only does it have these files, but each job is now responsible for making sure that the next person down the chain has everything they need. So thinking about that, even if you are doing this all on your own, making sure you remember each person who's in the chain, each step that's in the chain is only finished when it delivers a particular product to the next step. And in this case, that product has to have everything included. As you can see, a lot of what this boils down to, honestly, is maintaining that habit, maintaining the habit of recording everything. So we record everything, and that's the other thing too. We're delivering that production pack. That's the big deal. The one place where we tend to mess these things up is not making sure that everything is squared away once we get into production, because once needles are moving, the deal is done. We know that we can't redo these very easily. Tearing out embroidery is costly, both in time and damage to the garments. And these particular garments, the shells, do not look great once you start tearing things out. We want to make sure that we deliver that information on the get-go. It has to be proper. It has to be correct. It has to be careful and complete and precise. So do we deliver that production pack? And in this case, whether this is through a digital means where someone's being able to look up the individual production order, or it is something like what we've done here, or that's external. You could also have a mass order, but then in that mass order, if we have divisions like this where it is super critical, yes, it sounds like a lot of time to do things like produce, like I showed you earlier, that individual sponsor sheet. But those individual sponsor sheets save you over and over and over again. And this is kind of how I think about it. When we're dealing with something that's huge like this, whether it's multiple decorations, whether it's a large order, and strangely enough, no matter even in creative pursuits, one of the things we can do best to keep these things manageable is to divide them up and organize individual sections. So when we're dealing with our orders like this, we bring them in, and what is the first thing I was doing? Divide by sponsor, because I know that's the eventual deliverable. And to provide additional value to my customer, I'm going to deliver these things packaged and ready to distribute. Or in the case of the Balloon Fiesta jackets, we were also we were allowed to count out and occasionally have people come directly to us to pick things up when it wasn't feasible for them to be distributed by the Balloon Fiesta. So we could divide these things and organize them. So individual sponsors now become a sub-product to the overall order. The thing you have to be clear about, though, is that you record everything, because in the end, if you are going to, number one, deliver on all your promises, make sure that everybody gets what they need. Number two, make sure that the counts match your intake. And number three, get paid for everything that you did. Get paid for all the work that you put into this. The only way to make that happen is to absolutely be sure you record everything. So in order to manage these multiple customizations, the easy thing to say is that once we've divided them, right, in that individual box that is separate for sponsors, in that individual sub-order, it is only going to get one logo. If I hand somebody a mass of garments and they're going to get all sorts of different logos, we're opening up some issues there. Organizing them ahead of time, even if you're doing something as simple as in a single stack, let's say we don't have a tremendous number of garments, but we have 3 different logos in this stack, stack them in your production queue. And in between the different sets of logos, put a sheet of paper, put a marker, put something that stops the person for a 1/2 second to stop and say, we've reached the end of a division, don't keep going. Stack them on a work table next to your machine and only have 1 stack per logo so that when you hit the table, you know you're done. Some of this stuff is incredibly simple and it seems stupid, but it's preparation. I know I've talked to you guys about mise en place before, making sure everything is within an ergonomic distance so you don't have to go searching for everything. The same thing is the case here. Don't leave a ton of work, a ton of mental labor toward the production process. When you're going into production, when you're packaging things up to be done, you should be pretty sure about what you have. And especially in production, everything should be pretty brainless. I should be able to keep the needles running. I should be able to keep hoops in and out of the garments, and I should be able to move them across without making decisions. Decisions about color shouldn't be made on the machine. They should have been made before we get to the machine, almost always. Decisions about, especially things like decisions about what logo goes on what garment, that's not happening in production. We're not moving needles when that's going on. That's happening much earlier, and by the time we are pushing the go button, we should have already made those decisions and everything should be divided out and ready to go. We shouldn't be calling up a customer while screaming over the sound of the machine running at the last minute, asking them for a color change unless something has either gone very wrong or we're dealing with an emergency that we couldn't have seen coming. I mean, is that going to happen sometimes? Yes. Should that happen for every part of a multi-decoration order? Absolutely not. We manage that intake, and part of managing that intake, it helps us to see, okay, I don't have what I need to go forward yet. I can make sure the customer knows if I don't have what I need to go forward, I'm not going to go forward. So it's going to delay things. And when I go back and talk to this customer, especially when we have a middleman like we do with events like this, I can stop and say, hey, I do have all of this, but let me just rattle off to you the 10 people who I don't currently, like the 10 sponsors for whom I don't have current art, and the other 6 sponsors for whom I don't have an approval yet, and I've already sent art. Do you know this? And if you do, can you chase those folks down? Can you send that out? Let everybody know who needs, like what we need before things get done. Also, because you're looking at this and you've already established boundaries for when you can get things done, you have cutoff dates for when you are getting close to an event. Now, always leave padding. There's going to be somebody who comes in and you want to be the hero. I get it. Leave padding in your cutoff date, but don't leave too much and make it clear that it's not something you're trying to do. Leave padding for yourself. Don't do it don't leave it so that people can use it on purpose and constantly be late. But we establish those due dates so that we can look at this sheet on our intake. We can look at this sheet that says whether or not we've moved something into production. We can look at a sheet that says whether or not it has been produced yet, and look at those checkout sheets to check out our counts. And the other thing is we can see when we've got errors, when we have spoilage, and deal with them immediately if the information is central and accessible. Like I said, if it's in a business management software product, that is the best version of it. A cloud-based business management software product will have all of this stuff constantly updated, easy for you to see, as long as everyone is maintaining the habit of recording everything. However, even if we're just looking at the end of the day, we can stop and do a review at the end of the day, take all of this information that's been written down, enter it back into our system. If it's something that's been written down by hand, like you might see in those checkoff sheets, and say, all right, our problems are these. I need to make sure that at the end of each day of this production cycle, or at the end of each portion of this production cycle, I go back to my middle person customer who's handling this stuff, for whom I'm making this complicated order happen, and say, this is what I need. We are nearing the point of these things not making the deadline if we don't get them in soon. This is what we're going to deal with. Now, certainly, sometimes it'll fall on you to handle the individual discussion with someone on the other end who is a sponsor, or you'll have this not for final sponsors. If you're lucky, you don't have that being a middleman and end sponsor situation. What you actually have is individual divisions within a company, and that way we have a single decision maker. That is the best, because I'll tell you from experience, dealing with multiple decision makers over multiple companies can be a headache at the best of times, and certainly can cause things to slow down. But being acutely aware of where in the process of sales, art, production, packaging, each one of these designs, each one of these sets of garments are, means that in the management of the people on the other end, the stuff that I can't control, it's a lot easier for me to be able to tell them where they are, tell them what I need, and make things clear and establish expectations. If you don't have that information, you're scrambling all the time. You're asking 15 people if somebody's off at a lunch break, or if you don't know, you can't find the box of garments right this second to look through them, or if you didn't check them in. If someone calls you onto the mat to say, okay, what do we need? What are we doing? Where are things at? You can't answer. And that is an unenviable place to be, and it doesn't make you look good. Not to mention, you may have slipped something by in the intake process that now they're calling upon you to deal with at the outset. If you don't do your intake and your check-in properly, and you miss garments that are there, I mean, some of these things are going to happen by accident, but if you consistently do that, on the far end of it, they're going to say, hey, where are those garments? And when it's something like what I was dealing with, it was not okay, and is the kind of thing that could lose you a client. Because if you are, let's say, or when I was doing things for movies, or for, not only screen use stuff, but for production staff, things that were of a sensitive nature that weren't supposed to be seen outside of the group, or things that were quite expensive or valuable, or things that are collectible, you can't have missing garments walking off into your shop. You can't have things walking off. You definitely don't want to see them walking into eBay. You definitely don't want to see these things on Facebook Marketplace later on that day, because that now you are absolutely in for it. You cannot justify how these things got disappeared. And honestly, even if it's completely innocent, you just didn't count something in. It doesn't take too many full tilt Columbia jackets to really start eating into your profit margin on a decoration job. 100%. Now, doing work like this does open you up to a great deal of conventional work down the road because of everyone who you now have a logo for, everyone who now has been given your information or who knows that you exist as a supplier. So some of these multiple orders that have tons of logos for different sponsors, despite the incredible headache, can be great leaders for further work down the road. However, they do take a tremendous amount of work. But that's the thing we just need to make sure that we maintain here is the habit. It's the habit of informational control. It's the habit of intake, processing, recording, and passing things on in sequence. Complete, careful, precise information workflow. That's how it has to be. So what are we doing when we're managing multiple customizations? What are the things we need to think about? Like I said, informational workflow is the thing, but the first part of it, no matter what, is to work on your intake of information. This is every order you've ever done, whether it's the multiple stuff or not. Make sure you know all of the information that you need to make the process happen in the art department, in the production department, before you let somebody go on the initial interview, if at all possible. The initial intake is the best time you can do it. Once we're to the point that the order is happening, I'm not talking about the sales process. When the order is happening, we want to make sure that the intake of information is correct and complete and we have everything we need. So in the case of something like this, where we have multiple decorations, we're going to have a master list of some kind, as you saw before, that has the list of all of our people who we are serving, all of the different logos or individual divisions that we're going to serve. For each of these, we need to have art assets, whether that is an already completed file and the colorway, that can be an art asset we can use. If that is art that is to be digitized in color with an understanding of the sizes that are going to be used. In this case, part of that was dictated by the garments and by the event, but it's not always going to be the case. So we want to make sure we have all of the information we usually need to digitize a logo. We will need to have all of the personalization that needs to happen. So all of the names for each of the people, and these must be divided by size. You don't let these go unless you have a chart. At the very least, there should be a list with individual personalizations, and each line with a personalization on it must have a size that goes with it. And we need to make sure immediately upon receiving these things that your master list of garments that they think that they're giving you or that they have given you matches everything that they need from the personalization list and for the ones that aren't being personalized. The master list needs to match what they think they have. You would be surprised how many times people bring in orders where they will bring in 3 XL jackets, and in the personalization list, when someone has asked for sizes down the road, they say that you're supposed to have 5, and they've listed 5, and you find out that there are 2 extra larges, but there are like 2 superfluous large jackets and 2 less extra larges because someone who is doing the order has shifted the numbers around. The totals line up, but the individual line items, the individual people aren't going to get what they need. Jive those things together on the intake and do a check-in. Check in garments and absolutely make sure you have what you have and justify that, reckon that with the person who's bringing them to you. Master the intake of information and assets. Remember, every department is a customer. Once things come into you, make sure you have all that information done. If you're someone who's handling art, by the time this goes to production, they should have a full list of what goes on what. It should have the logo, the sizing. We should have a final version of the logo with the complete colorway, and it shouldn't have any guesswork involved. Colors are listed by thread number. The sequence is absolutely known. The position is known if it's not something that's dictated by the entire set of garments. And they should know exactly which sizes jive with which personalizations. I think we should divide and organize. So my tendency is to try and repackage these things where if I've got a multiple logo order, each logo is going to be packaged with the garments that take that logo, because the thing that is the most likely to cause you headaches and to be the worst thing to have to either pick out or replace or cover or do whatever you have to do with it if an error does occur is going to be full logo work. Text is less egregious, though it's still awful. We don't want it to happen. I may not package individual person's garments with one copy of their name. However, when we're talking about things that have a logo and a name involved, we will package them by that division and say each logo in this multiple logo order will have its own divided group of garments that only go with that logo. Divide and organize, make it mindless. By the time you're pushing buttons on the machine, you should be hooping, loading, running. You should set up your logo. You should set up your threads. You should set up your sequence. And once that is done, no matter how you do it, whether you use the most low-tech methods or you're getting these things from a transfer file and everything's running immediately, once you set up that machine, the things that are in that division should just be going on the machine and the logos should be running. Now, the great thing is you can also sub-organize. I've done it to such an extent that I have set this thing up where the sizes are divided in the stack so that as you put them on by size, you actually can go through and have a set of names that is a setup for a multi-head machine, where as you're on the XLs, you turn on one head and then turn off the rest and keep flipping heads until we get to the end of the row. And each grouping by size is set up with a file so that if you've loaded that file full of names, it is only the names for one particular size garment. In a large enough order, it can make sense to organize like that. When we're starting to deal with individual garments that are of one size in each order, it may or may not make sense. Works better for much larger orders, but no matter what you're doing here, the concept is to divide up something large into a bite-size sub-order that is easy to handle and organize it one way or another, whether you divide them into individual boxes, whether you put an insert, a piece of paper that's reusable, a piece of cardboard, something from the packaging that comes with garments sometimes is useful for this, where it's just something that stops people. I've seen shops that like to use a big piece of like fluorescent green, safety orange cardstock between these stacks so that when someone hits it, there is no ignoring the fact that they've hit the end of a segment, they've hit the end of a logo order. So divide and organize and make sure that's right. Record everything. And like I said, just maintain your workflow. As we get to the end of the process, the same way we check in, we check out. Check the garments in, check them out. Same thing with art. We check the art in, make sure everyone knows that what we have so that we can refer to it and chase the things we need. And when we get done, we check out the approval process and we commit to our list whether or not we've sent off our production pack to production. And the same thing should happen in production and finishing. When they finish, they should be checking off the individual garments on the sponsor sheet or on some sort of form of this. And if we're in a production software system, they should just be counting out their final pieces and recording any potential problems or errors or shortages. So maintain informational workflow and, as always, record everything. Now, I know that was kind of dry, folks. That's not always what you guys want to see. Certainly, there's some other fun stuff in the links list. If you want to check out some of the stuff that's there, you'll get to read a little bit more about awards and stuff like that. Next week, we'll endeavor to do something that's more about digitizing or execution. If you have something you particularly want to see as far as that, if you want to see something creative, you have something else you want to check out, by all means, let me know in the comments. Contact me anywhere you find me on social media, and we can handle that. So anything else you want to check out, let me know. If you have any questions about this, if you're watching on the replay and you want to ask questions, absolutely catch me in the comments. We can talk about the different methods for organizing this stuff. Like I said, I know sometimes it's dry, but if we're talking about what's going to save you money and make you a better shop, this kind of stuff is going to save you more money in the long run than, the things I can tell you that are fun about fills. Most of the time, that's going to make the difference for you. This is the kind of process stuff that if you don't get this right, they're not going to let you do the creative work. If you can't deliver someone's garment at the right size with the right name on it, no amount of the creative work I teach you will save you from having an angry customer on the other end. All right, folks. So with that, and here, I'm going to go ahead and grab a comment. We have something from Bevy Jean that's worth it. So the saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Thanks to the organization tips. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no matter what we're doing with this stuff, that's how we do it. I mean, one bite at a time. The organizational part is one bite at a time. And frankly, though it seems like a lot of extra work, recording everything doesn't really take the time. And if you have any sort of busyness or multiple orders that are in your life, you know that you're going to be bopping back and forth between these different orders. And even if you were doing this for a creative purpose, let's say we're doing smaller orders, this still lets us work in a way that's efficient. And imagine now that we are a smaller shop. We're not like my shop that had tens of heads, or, we're not a shop that has 100 heads. We're a shop with one head. But let's say that in the course of doing an order for someone, they're bringing things in piecemeal or receiving these piecemeal, they're adding on extra pieces. How much better is that order going to go if for that order I am recording either on a spreadsheet or in a system of some kind, the pieces that come in, whether or not I've done them, the colors that I use so that I can talk about it the next time I have that order again. I mean, how much better is the order going to go, and how much better is the next order going to go for a similar piece? Even if I was doing something for a family reunion, and I've done a ton of that stuff, family reunion t-shirts and hats and things like that have individual names with a mass family reunion logo or logo type, is the same kind of order. We still have to maintain sizes, and frequently they come with repeated orders or additional items that come after the initial order. Keeping those things straight and making sure we're being paid for things correctly often requires us to divide and conquer, to make sure that everything is organized, to make sure our intake is right, to check things in, to follow up, and definitely to get approvals on things like names that are highly personal to people, but are easily misspelled because the spellings may or may not be standard as we might understand them to ourselves, or we may have not encountered the spelling of the name that we're looking at. Invariably, organizing is never going to bite you in the butt. Not organizing will. I'm not going to say we don't fly by the seat of our pants sometimes, but putting things on a spreadsheet and writing them down is never going to be the big problem for you. And the likelihood is you won't devolve into something crazy. And in fact, in the cases of the stuff that I'm showing you here, the initial spreadsheet that I'm using to build a spreadsheet I need starts with me telling my customer what I need from you is to start with a spreadsheet that has these columns on it. And these other columns you don't have to fill out, and those are for my use only. They fill those columns out as they're taking orders. It makes it easier for them to get the information they need to give to you. And then when those are all filled out and they give you that information, it means that they've done their part. The expectation that is their part of the order has been fulfilled. And they can then hand that to you and say, I've given you the information. If there's anything else we need, what is it that we're missing? And we can make sure that that all jives. It gives us a common ground that we can refer to. And most definitely down the road, it allows us to make sure that we're tracking everything through the process. And like I said, especially when we're using a centralized system we refer to later, it makes us seem like superheroes when a customer comes back to us and says, hey, I thought I did that logo last year. What was that like? What was my stitch count? What were the colors? Can we use that again? Or if you're lucky enough to be in the process where I was, you're doing a big multi-logo order like this, and then the individual companies come to you for conventional embroidery, you can then say, all right, yes, I have your stuff. Let's talk about what it would take to put this same logo from your jackets on a polo shirt. In any case, folks, follow the process through. Be careful, complete, and precise. Make sure you are delivering to the next stage of the game a package of everything that the person who's doing it, even if it's you, needs to be in production, needs to be in fulfillment, needs for billing. And just trust the process and follow it through. Develop the habit, and you'll be happy you did. With that, folks, like I said, you want to see something else, you want to see something interesting that has to do with creative pursuits or digitizing, let me know what it is, and I will catch you guys next week with another Education Friday.